Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 28 of the Green Bean podcast. My name is Katie Green and this is Jack, and we both want to welcome you to my studio, especially if it's your first visit. Welcome in and thanks for joining us. This is a podcast about my creative practice. I'm an illustrator by trade, but I also knit and sew and design, and I get all of my inspiration from walking on Dartmoor, which is the national park close to where we live. So in this episode, I've got quite a lot to share with you actually. I've got some news updates. I want to share some illustration projects that I've been working on lately. I've got a bit of a knitting update, although not actual knitting. We'll come to that. Lots of sewing, including the dress that I'm wearing, and of course a lovely walk out on Dartmoor. So settle in, thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy this episode. As I said at the beginning of the episode, I have lots of news that I want to share with you this time, particularly a couple of commissioned illustration projects that I worked on earlier in the year that have come out into the world. But before we get started on that, I have some more personal news that I want to share, which is both exciting and scary in, I'm going to say, equal measure. My feelings about it fluctuate. But basically, I'm going to be having some surgery in the next few weeks. Surgery that I've been waiting for a long time, and yeah, I've never had surgery before, so I'm excited and terrified, and of course it's going to have an impact on my work and on the podcast. And it just feels like already 2020 has been such a massive year for everybody in the world. I feel like things have really been shaken up, so to add this thing into the mix for me personally feels huge. It feels like good timing because of the current coronavirus situation here in the UK. It looks like things are heading back towards another lockdown. So the thought of kind of turning inwards, spending a quiet winter at home, recovering and generally taking good care of myself feels good. But yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting few months ahead for me personally, and for Jack, who's going to be my caretaker, and for the podcast. So it'll be interesting. I've got plans to obviously we've been taking some extra walks on the moor, recording some extra footage because I might not be able to get out there for a while. Things like that, planning ahead. But I'm also prepared that maybe I won't feel up to podcasting at all for a while. So I'm gonna just take it easy and see how I feel. And I'm sure that those of you who've been with me for a long time will be understanding and not mind about that. But certainly that is very much what is on my mind at the moment and informing the kind of creative work that I'm doing, which is not very much. So instead of sharing a current drawing project, I want to share a couple of commissions that I worked on earlier in the year that I couldn't tell you about at the time because they were secret, but now they've come out in the world, I can share them with you. So the first one is, let me tell you about it first. So as an illustrator, one of my dreams has always been to create a colouring book. I used to love colouring books when I was a kid, and I know there's been this craze for adult colouring books lately, and I have always wanted to create one. And yeah, so I couldn't say no when Tanya Ashton-Jones, who is known as TJ Frog, you might have heard her audio podcast called TJ Frog, and she's based on the Isle of Skye, actually very close to the place where I stayed when I visited the Isle of Skye a few years ago. And she is an incredible designer and maker of Dorset buttons. She is originally from Dorset. Jack doesn't want to talk about Dorset buttons, so I'm going to let him go. Tanya designs and makes Dorset buttons and teaches the making of Dorset buttons. She's an incredible and lovely person, and she also has her own yarn spun, which I have some of in my stash. But she got in touch because she wanted to add some stationery products to her shop with a Dorset button theme, and one of the things she wanted to do was make a colouring book. So I jumped at the chance to do that for her. So Tanya commissioned me to create the illustrations for this little book based on Dorset buttons and on people taking her workshops and making Dorset buttons. So it's just lovely to see this come together. I haven't seen on social media any images of people having coloured these in yet, but I really would love to. I really enjoyed creating these illustrations, particularly the ones of the buttons. That won't surprise you because I just love tiny, tiny details. Tanya also had them made into postcards, which you can colour, or she had some printed as cards that are pre-coloured as well. So there's loads of options, and I really enjoyed working on this project. So I'll pop the link in the details down below for Tanya's website, where you can get the colouring book, the postcards, and have a look at her Dorset button kits as well. So that was the second to last commission I worked on before I took a break from doing commissions over the summer this year. And the one after that was, again, for a Scottish maker, this time Julie from Black Isle Yarns. I've known Julie for a while. She lives in a part of Scotland that I've visited, so there's another personal connection there, which I really love. So Julie got in touch and told me that she was working on a book to accompany her newest yarn, Alshan. I haven't checked with Julie on the pronunciation of that, so I hope I've got it correct. It's a beautiful blend of yarn, and what Julie does is she travels to all of her local farms, handpicks the fleeces. So the yarn is super, super local to her, and it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. So I said, of course, I would like to work on this project with her, and I did two things. The first of which is the book. Let me show you. It's called Perspectives. It's edited by Julie herself and by Emily K. Williams, who's an amazing knitwear designer and also fellow cold water swimmer. I really enjoy seeing Emily's pictures on Instagram of her cold water swims in the Scottish lochs. Always makes me really jealous. But this book, I think it's just been made available for pre-order, and it's absolutely stunning. It's full of beautiful photos of the Scottish landscape, the whole story of the yarn from sheep to skein, and absolutely stunning designs. So my contribution to the book was a few small illustrations. I'm going to find the main one that I did, which is here, a map of the Black Isle area in Scotland where Julie sources all of her fleeces. She knows the names of all the farms, so it's really completely traceable and amazing. But for me, the most exciting bit about this book is the knitwear designs, and it's been hard for me to pick a favourite, but I think the project that I most want to make is this vest by Emily. I think it's absolutely gorgeous, and it has this lace design in it that's inspired by flowing water, so it definitely picks up on that connection of swimming and the love of water that Emily and I both share. Altogether, the book is just beautifully produced. I'm really excited that I get to hold a copy in my hands already. It's amazing. So it's been lovely to be part of this exciting project. But alongside the book, Julie also asked me to create a tea towel design for her based on the dye plants that she forages. So not only does Julie produce this yarn from scratch, but she also naturally dyes it. She uses some extracts, but she also forages loads of dye plants in her local area. And this map that I created shows the location of those dye plants, which ones she uses around the area where she lives. And if you've been watching my podcast for a while, you'll know that I love maps, I love plants, I love a kind of botanical style of illustration. So this was another just an illustrator's dream commission. So while I was working on this project, it feels like a long time ago because I had to keep it secret for a while, but I took some video footage of myself working on the illustrations for the tea towel. So I've got some of that to share with you, so you get to see the process of Julie's tea towel coming to life. But all in all, these have been great commissions, and they were a really nice end to a period of doing commissions. I decided to stop taking commissions earlier in the year so that I could focus more on some personal work, and that feels like it's been a good decision and one that I'm going to keep on with for the time being, certainly until I'm done with surgery recovery and settled back into, I want to say the word normality, but I'm not sure if I know what that is anymore after 2020. We shall see. But these were two lovely commissions to kind of end that period of my work. And huge thanks to Tanya and to Julie for commissioning those projects from me. I loved it. couple of reasons why I haven't got any knitting to share with you in this episode. The first of which is, and patrons will already know, that I've been working for most of the summer on a new jumper design, and it's so close to coming to fruition. I really hoped I would be able to release it before going in for my surgery, but I just don't think it's going to quite come together. And I realised that this is not the time to be putting pressure on myself to finish a project and get it out into the world. So I've just kind of held back. If it does come together, that'll be great. If it doesn't quite come together in time, then it'll be there ready for me to launch soon afterwards, as soon as I feel up to putting it out in the world. So there's that exciting thing to come, but I'm just not quite there with being ready to tell you about it yet. However, I've also been knitting on various other projects. As you'll know if you've watched recent episodes, I've had a different project in each of the recent episodes, none of which are finished. And I've been feeling a little bit like I've not wanted to do as much knitting. I've definitely been more focused on sewing over the last few months. But as I head towards surgery, and like I said, that's pretty much the thing that's consuming most of my mind at the moment, is the thought of having to spend a month or two at home just taking things easy, relaxing. And, you know, there's a part of my brain that lights up and it's like, wow, I can knit through my entire stash in that time. And trying to convince her to just calm down a bit and be reasonable is one thing, but also it really is an opportunity to just take things easy, give myself a bit of space and time. And in particular, I've been thinking a lot about the knitting projects that I'm going to turn to in those first few weeks, even in those first few days while I'm still in hospital. What is it that I'm going to want to do with my hands to help me relax? And what I realised is that most of the projects I have on the needles are going to be too complicated for somebody who's just woken up from a general anaesthetic and is on lots of painkillers and feeling a bit discombobulated. So I've been really thinking about simple, straightforward, achievable projects that I can turn to during that time. And also, as you see me sitting here hand winding a skein of yarn on my noster pinner, I've been using the opportunity of thinking about those projects as a way of kind of taking it easy, taking a bit of time to myself. Now I do have a Swift, it's just out of shot, and I do have like a mechanical cake winder, which I use most of the time, but I really, really love winding skeins by hand. And I learned how to do this with a noster pinner from a video by Anne Kingstone. I'll pop the link down below. And it's just such a soothing, relaxing process. I also love how you get to pass the whole skein of yarn through your hands before you work with it, so you get to feel the texture. In this case it's a hand-dyed skein, so I'm really appreciating the subtlety of that colour. It won't surprise you to hear that this is a skein dyed by Viola, Emily Foden, so although it probably just looks brown to you on the camera, it's got kind of shades of blue and red and gold and all these glorious colours in there. It's just going to be a pleasure to knit plain stocking stitch with this yarn. But my plan, the project I've planned, is the Forest Fruit Socks by Sachiko Burgin. They were released recently and I just fell in love with them straight away. They're pretty basic stocking stitch socks with a little band of colourwork at the cuff. My plan is to knit the cuff with the colourwork before I go into hospital, so I just have the really basic, simple bit of the sock to finish while I'm in there. And hopefully the ability to finish a project will feel satisfying, but the actual knitting will be nice, comforting and straightforward, and I can enjoy these beautiful colours of the Viola yarn. That's my plan. But it also keeps changing because I am, like many of you I'm sure, crafting and thinking about crafting are ways that I cope with anxiety and big feelings. So I'm finding that my mind is obsessing about what I'm going to knit, what I'm going to make, and which yarn I'm going to use, and all of these options, whereas probably what I'm really worried about is it going to hurt when they put that needle in me, and how long am I going to be in the hospital, and am I going to be sick after I wake up from the anaesthetic, and all of those bigger questions that are really scary I can kind of put to one side when I'm thinking about which pattern am I going to knit, which yarn am I going to use, or sitting here and gently winding a skein. There's something peaceful about it. So there's two things going on here, aren't there? There's finding the right project, and it's also an act of self-care to really dive into our crafting at this time and recognise that we have an ability to look after ourselves through the making that we do, or even the thinking about the making. I think it's equally important. As I said, I've been gravitating much more towards my sewing lately than my knitting. And I think, again, that the upcoming surgery has got something to do with that. I've definitely been focusing on making kind of comfortable, useful projects, particularly pyjamas. I realised I didn't have any nice pyjamas that made me feel really good, apart from the dinosaur set that I made recently. I've since made another dinosaur set, and I've got fabric cut to make another few sets as well. I've been making underwear, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second, but I didn't want to go much further without talking about this dress, which has a bit of a story to go along with it. I didn't even take any film of myself making it because I did it so quickly. It is this pattern, M7948 from McCall's. I've made it before, and I made a couple of modifications this time. One, the same as last time, I added pockets. I'm always going to add pockets because why would you make a garment without pockets? I don't really know. And the second modification I made this time was to the neckline. I made it a little bit bigger, if you can believe that. It still feels quite high to me, but it's bigger. In the pattern it has a keyhole opening at the back, which I found not only a pain to sew, but it didn't fit very comfortably, and it didn't. The dress didn't hang properly when it was tied. It was done up. It was very high necked. So I've just I took the neckline from my favourite dress, my ever favourite dress, from the Formal and Little Black Dress book by Yoshiko Suguri, and added it onto this pattern. It's perfect. I would not make any more changes to this pattern. I love it. And the dress came about because I had to go into the hospital for some pre-tests this week, and I don't mind sharing that I am super squeamish and terrified of needles. So that's part of my anxiety leading up to the surgery, is worrying about being poked and prodded and all that kind of stuff. And I spoke to my therapist the day before, and we were discussing things that might help. And I just suddenly had this feeling that if I could wear something that I felt really good in, I would carry myself differently and walk in there feeling stronger. And I had 24 hours from the end of my therapy appointment to the hospital appointment, and I knew that I was being slightly bananas trying to sew a dress from scratch in that time. I hadn't pre-cut it, I hadn't planned it. The only thing I had done was pre-wash the fabric, because I try to pre-wash all of my fabrics when they arrive in the house, so that when I take them by the whim to sew with them, they're ready. I don't have to then wait for them to wash and dry. So I pulled this green linen out of my wardrobe and I was like, this is a simple dress. There are no fastenings to contend with. Most of the shapes are large rectangles. It's a very straightforward sew, and especially if you eliminate that keyhole neckline, I'd really recommend it for a first time dress, because it's nice and loose, there's not a lot of fitting to contend with, and almost all of the sewing is straight lines. So I did it, and I walked into the hospital appointment wearing it, and I felt amazing. And you know, I'm not going to say it was easy. It's never fun for me, but it was easier than it might have been. So definitely there was some sewing magic at work, and I'm really glad that I took the time out of my working week to just whip myself up a dress. Yeah, it was amazing. Not a lot more to say about that. I will put a post on my blog with more details about the dress, and I'll link it below if you want to see a bit more close-ups images of what the dress looks like. It's got a two-tiered skirt, and it just feels amazing. It's one of those dresses that you put on and you want to twirl around in. It feels really good. So it won't be the last one that you see me make either. But what I really wanted to talk about in terms of sewing in this episode was knickers. And I've got a pair behind me that I've made, and I've been making my knickers out of the off-cut fabric from my pyjama making. So it feels quite resourceful, and patrons will have heard me talk about this knicker pattern before, but I don't think I've talked about it here on the podcast.
and I don't know why not, because I've been making loads of them. So the pattern that I've been using as a basis is the Ava Panties by Ohhh Lulu, which is a high-waisted knicker pattern. And the first pair I made, I did follow the pattern exactly, but I found them a little bit too high in the waist for me. They came up right to my natural waist, and that was higher than most of my clothes that I wear, so they would stick out the top of my skirts and things. It just didn't feel comfortable. So I took about an inch off the waist, and then I added a little bit more fullness to the back because I have a nice round bottom. And I've also modified the gusset. I'm going to show you by turning these inside out. I find that the gusset in knickers that you buy, or knickers that you buy a sewing pattern for, is just in the wrong place for my anatomy. So I drafted this gusset, which, so the normal gusset would come about here, there'd be a straight line. I drafted this bigger gusset that does like a half moon shape at the front. It's so much more comfortable. And rather than leaving it loose to kind of flap around like a traditional gusset, I just stitched it down with a zigzag stitch. It's an absolute game changer for me. And what I've been finding is that I want to wear my handmade knickers much more than my shop bought knickers. So I've been frantically making more pairs. I've got another 3 pairs here behind me that are already cut. And I find the best way of sewing them is working in batches. So you can see these pairs have all got their waist elastic added. I just need to add the elastic around the legs. The gussets are already fitted inside. So I've managed to get 4 pairs out of the offcuts of the hummingbird pyjamas, which I haven't made yet, by the way. They're just cut in a pile waiting. Again, the cutting and preparing sewing projects is part of my nesting, I'm going to want projects to do in surgery recovery thing that I've got going on, because cutting, I find you need a lot of space, but it's also quite physical. There's a lot of bending over and moving around. I'm imagining I won't be able to do that for a while, but if I've got some projects that are pre-cut, I can just sit at the sewing machine and work through them if I'm feeling like it. So I'm giving myself lots of options for things that I can pick up if I feel like it. I'm fully prepared that I might not feel like any of it at all. Before we move on from talking about underwear, I want to talk about the joys of fold-over elastic. Now, one of the reasons I avoided sewing underwear for so long was because I was afraid of handling the elastic and having to roll things up and make nice enclosed edges and things. And I heard about the Ava Panties first on Inside Number 23 podcast, another Katie, and she mentioned the fold over elastic, and it just blew my little mind. It's basically the elastic equivalent of bias binding. You'll know from my dresses that I love a bias binding finish, and it's just that you can enclose the raw edge of your jersey in this elastic with one stitch all the way around, and your job is done. It makes knicker making so straightforward. And I picked up this lovely frilly edged fold over elastic from Frumble Fabrics here in the UK. They have several colours. What I have discovered is that jersey fabrics and knicker elastics tend to come in brighter colours than are my preference, so I've just embraced it and let my inner child choose the pyjama and underwear fabrics. We're just going with it. They're all going to be exceptionally cute and colourful, and I think I'm fine with that. But yeah, I've become not obsessed. Knicker making does feel slightly like a chore. It's not as exciting as making a dress or a shirt or something that you can take a cute photo of for Instagram. I'm not going to be taking photos of me modelling my knickers for Instagram. It's just not me. So it is more of like a practical task than an exciting sewing project, but it's also really incredibly satisfying, and slowly I'm adding more handmade underwear to my drawer, and letting the shop bought stuff go as it wears out, or as a certain small dog chews it up, which he does. And I'll be having words with him if he does that with any of my handmade pairs. I have a really exciting book recommendation to share with you this episode, and that's because it's a brand new book written and illustrated by my dear friend Katriona Chapman. And here it is. It's called Breakwater, and it's fantastic to hold it in my hands after following Katrina's journey through making this book as a supporter on Patreon. And to see it for real is amazing. I was lucky enough to get to read the book before it was in print, because they asked me to provide a quote for the back cover, they being Katrina's publisher, I should say, which is Avery Hill. And here's what Katie Green had to say about it. Subtle and charming, moving and oh so beautifully drawn. Breakwater made me both laugh and cry. I loved it. And that kind of says everything about it. So I don't want to give too much away, but it's about a character who works in an old-fashioned cinema in Brighton. So it's set by the seaside, and it's full of Katrina's beautifully drawn illustrations. I love the way that she portrays characters and mood. I love these kind of big single-page illustrations that she does that are so moving and evocative. Love everything about it. It smells really good too. I don't know if you appreciate that about a book, but certainly something that I really enjoy is the smell of a good book. I really love the story. It's knowing Katriona personally as I do, she has a lot of history working in a customer-facing type role, and anybody who has worked in a job like that will recognise some of the characters in here, both the employees and the strange customers, and there's lots of really nice subtle observation about human relationships in here that I really enjoyed. So I hope that you can get hold of a copy. I believe that if you want signed ones, Katriona is selling them through her Etsy, or various independent comic shops in the UK are offering them with limited edition book plates, and there's all kinds of beautiful things that you can get to accompany this book. I really recommend it. I loved it. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Green Bean podcast. I hope you've enjoyed spending some time with me here in Devon. If you want to catch us between now and the next episode, I actually publish in between episodes on Patreon, and it's supporters on Patreon who make this podcast possible. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you who supports it. It really is the difference between me being able to make this podcast and not. So if you want to support the podcast and get access to all of the back catalogue of extra episodes, you can do that on patreon.com/Katie Greenbean. If that's not your thing, no worries, you can find us on Instagram as Katie Greenbean, and there's a link there to sign up to my newsletter as well, if you want to hear news about the shop, that kind of thing. Until next time then, take care, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!